The Detroit Lions have won 4 NFL championships. The years they won it were 1935, 1952, 1953, and 1957. In this video, I will be ranking those championship teams. The way I rank these teams will be based on a combination of factors. I'm going to look at how high these teams ranked in offense or defense. I'll be looking at the number of great individual players these teams had. I'll be looking for complementary football. The defense can be ranked really high, but the offense might not, and vice versa. The more each aspect of a team contributes to winning, the more complete I will probably view that team. The other thing I will be looking for is what teams did you beat in the playoffs to win that championship. There's not really a single factor that is going to be more important than the other, but those are the general things that I will be taking into consideration. The other thing I should note is that a team's regular season record won't necessarily make me rank one team over another. The last thing I should note is that I'm ranking championship teams. I'm ranking teams that won championships. So all 4 of these teams were great, but some were not as great as others. So let's dive into this. The number 4 ranked Lions championship team wasn't really a hard decision for me, and it's going to be the 1957 team. The Lions this year had an offense that barely ranked in the upper half of the league, and their defense actually ranked in the lower half of the league. Please keep in mind that if you see an asterisk next to a player, then that means the player made a Pro Bowl. And if the player has a plus sign next to them, then that means they were first team All-Pro. And if they have both next to them, then they were both a Pro Bowler and a first team All-Pro. So you'll see that I noted that the Lions had 7 Pro Bowlers, but I only have 3 players listed there. The other 4 that made the Pro Bowl have asterisks next to them under the Contributing Hall of Famers section. I didn't feel it would be necessary to list a player twice, and that applies to the rest of this video. So with that explained, this team did have some really good individual players. They had 6 Contributing Hall of Famers and 7 Pro Bowlers, but the talent did not show up in the record. It showed up in the playoffs, but I just feel this team could have been a little better. There actually is complementary football with this team, but I don't really know if I would consider that a good thing because the offense and defense complemented each other poorly. Their postseason competition consisted of an 8-4 49ers team and a 9-2-1 Browns team for a collective winning percentage of 72.9%, which is the second lowest collective winning percentage for playoff opponents of these championship teams. And that 8-4 49ers team was kind of carried by its offense a little too much. The Browns team they defeated was really good, and they were a good complementary team, but I just think the other teams were a little better. Now, some quick notes about this team are that they had a takeaway in every game. The 49ers team that they defeated had a Hall of Fame quarterback in Y.A. Tittle. That's nice, but I wouldn't really say that the Lions exactly shut Tittle down in this game, considering he did have 3 touchdown passes. The Lions did come back from a 20-point deficit in the second half, which was certainly impressive. And then the Lions completely destroyed the Browns in the championship game, and that is probably the best complimentary win of any of the championships on this list. They held Jim Brown below his season average in rushing yards and yards per rush attempt. They also put up 59 points on the first-ranked Browns defense that was only surrendering 14.3 points per game during the regular season. So this talented team that underachieved in the regular season came to life in the postseason. However, the coming to life in the postseason will not be enough for me to move this team up. Now, putting a team that played in 1935 might be a little controversial because it was 1935. And football in 1935 versus football in 1957, you could almost make an argument that it wasn't even the same sport. But I'm going to go ahead and put the 1935 team number 3. They did only have 1 contributing Hall of Famer in Dutch Clark. However, they also had a player named Ox Emerson who should be in the Hall of Fame, but for some reason he isn't. And I decided to go with all pros to describe this particular team because the Pro Bowl was not yet a thing. Even with the lack of Hall of Famers on this team, the offense and defense were more complementary of each other in this run. And the offense and defense complemented each other very well in the championship game against the New York Giants. The Lions' defense held the opposition to 7 points, and the Lions' offense scored 26 points on a defense that was allowing only 8 points per game during the regular season. The Lions' defense in the regular season literally ranked right in the middle of the pack, but they didn't play like a middle-of-the-pack defense in the championship game. Now, with the following stats, I should note really fast for some context that the league average for points per game in 1935 for a team was 10.9 points per game. So with that alone, we can see just how insanely different football was back then than it is today. So with that noted, that 5 out of 9 ranked defense still had 3 shutouts during the regular season, and they allowed 9 or less points 6 times. When it comes to the offense, they scored 14 or more points 7 times. That sounds like something every team in the modern NFL does in basically every game, but scoring 14 points in 1935 was impressive when you factor in the context of it. So with scoring being so low in 1935, shutouts were much more prevalent, but the Lions did not get shut out one time in 1935, and they were only one of 2 teams to not be held scoreless. So the 1935 team would probably rank last to most of you, but for me, I'm going to go ahead and put it number 3. The number 2 Lions championship team, in my opinion, is the 1953 team. They were definitely a team that leaned on their defense, but they still had an offense that ranked in the upper half of the league, which is probably the biggest reason I give the 1953 team a slight edge over the 1957 and the 1935 teams. This team had 7 contributing Hall of Famers, with 6 of them making the Pro Bowl. The 7th Pro Bowler was Les Bingaman, who was a beast. Joe Schmidt, even being a rookie, was still able to get 2 interceptions for 51 yards and was still a key contributor on this team. They hosted a very loaded Cleveland Browns team that finished 11-1 and had 6 contributing Hall of Famers that included Otto Graham, Frank Gatsky, and Glenn Ford. Marion Motley was also on this team, but I didn't really consider him a key contributor to the Browns at this point in his career. Now, the opponent that the Lions defeated in the championship game was the Cleveland Browns, and even with it being just one game, the Browns' 91.7% winning percentage is the highest winning percentage of an opponent of all of these championship teams. Some notable things about this particular Lions team was that they had a takeaway in every game. They had 8 games where they had 5 or more takeaways, and they had 8 games of allowing 17 or less points in a game. The league average for scoring in 1953 was 21.5 points per game. I would probably say that the defense was the biggest factor in the championship game when you factor in the defensive job they did on Otto Graham, holding him to 2 for 15 for 20 yards, 2 interceptions, and a lost fumble. But at the same time, Bobby Lane did lead a game-winning drive in the 4th quarter on the number 1 ranked defense in the NFL. Bobby Lane came up big in this game. He definitely needed help to get the dub, but he capitalized on the help that he got. So in all honesty, the 1953 team definitely has a case to be number 1, but in my opinion, there was one team that was a little better than this team. The greatest Lions team of all time, in my opinion, is the 1952 team. They were very balanced and played great complementary football. They had the number 2 ranked scoring offense and the number 1 ranked scoring defense. And to top it off, they had 3 special teams touchdowns. This is probably the most complete team in Lions history. Bobby Lane was in his prime. Doak Walker contributed pretty heavily in the playoffs. Jack Christensen contributed heavily on defense and on special teams. All 3 phases of this team complemented each other extremely well. Outside of their Hall of Famers, they had Cloyce Box, who was kind of a 2-season wonder, but he was a first-team All-Pro in this particular season. They had Don Dahl, who currently holds the NFL record for most 10-plus interception seasons in NFL history, as far as I know. This team may not have had the best regular season record between these championship teams, but the contributions from all 3 phases doesn't go overlooked to me. Now, the only drawback with this team is that the collective winning percentage of their postseason opponents is the lowest of any of the Lions championship teams. But they did defeat a Norm Van Brocklin-led Rams team who had the number 1 offense in the NFL that year. And the 8-4 Browns team was probably a little better than their record showed when you consider that they had 7 contributing Hall of Famers and both sides of the ball complemented each other very well, considering they had the number 2 ranked defense and the number 3 ranked offense. But even with the collective winning percentage of the postseason opponents being the lowest of all these championship teams, I still felt that this was the most balanced and complete team. Now, the things that this team accomplished during the regular season is what really puts this team as the best Lions team of all time for me. The Lions defense held the Rams to 15 points per game in their 2 meetings when they were averaging 29.1 points per game during the regular season. The Lions scored 40 or more points 5 times in the regular season, and they held opponents to 17 or less points 8 times. The league average for scoring in 1952 was 22.3 points per game. The Lions in this particular season had 9 games with 4 or more takeaways and 5 games with 5 or more takeaways. This team wasn't just complimentary during the regular season, they were complimentary during the playoffs. When one aspect of the team failed to step up, another aspect of the team succeeded in doing so. The Lions would host the Rams for the right to play the Browns for a championship, and the Lions defense held them below their regular season average for the 3rd time in a row. They also held Dan Towers to 54 rushing yards when he was averaging 74.5 yards per game in the regular season. Lane didn't have his best game as he threw 4 interceptions against the Rams, but even with those 4 picks, the Lions still managed to put up 31 points. I wouldn't by any means call this game a defensive masterpiece by the Lions defense, but they played pretty good still. The Lions defense in the championship game held Otto Graham to 0 touchdowns. The Lions actually did that twice in championship games. And they held the Browns as a whole to only 7 points when they were averaging 25.8 points per game during the regular season. So the 1952 Lions team was probably the most complete team in Lions history. Well, that will be all for this video. Let me know what you guys think. Did I rank some teams too high, not high enough, or too low? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching as always, and I hope you enjoyed.